He left a single piece of evidence at the scene, a knife sheath, lying on the bed next to one of the victims. On that sheath was a microscopic trace of DNA that would lead police to a criminology Ph.D. student who'd been studying how to commit the perfect murder. But here's what keeps me awake. Bryan Kohberger didn't leave that sheath by accident. He left it because he took 4 people's lives within 8 minutes, and he never noticed it was missing. That level of focus, that degree of compartmentalization, that ability to execute a quadruple homicide in complete silence while 2 roommates slept downstairs, that's not rage, that's not passion, that's something far more disturbing. What I've found suggests we're not looking at a crime of opportunity. We're looking at a forensic experiment conducted by someone who believed he was smarter than every investigator who would come after him. November 13th, 2022, 4 a.m., Moscow, Idaho, a small college town where nothing ever happens. 4 University of Idaho students are stabbed to death in their rental house while they sleep. Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. The killer enters through a sliding glass door, moves through the house with precision, kills all 4 in separate rooms, and leaves without waking the 2 surviving roommates on the first floor. No forced entry, no screams loud enough to alert neighbors, no evidence of sexual assault, no robbery. Just 4 young people dead in their beds, killed with such efficiency that the coroner would later say some victims had defensive wounds, suggesting they woke during the attack but couldn't scream. The first call to 911 doesn't come until noon, 8 hours after the murders. The surviving roommates wake up, see the carnage, and their brains can't process what they're seeing. One of them had actually seen the killer. At 4 a.m., she heard crying, heard a male voice say, "It's okay, I'm going to help you," opened her door and saw a man in a black mask walking toward her. He walked past her, out the sliding door, and disappeared. She was in shock. She locked her door and didn't call 911 for 8 hours. This isn't cowardice. This is the freeze response to trauma so severe that the brain shuts down cognitive function to protect itself. But here's where it gets psychologically complex. The surviving roommate described the killer as having bushy eyebrows, despite him wearing a mask in a dark house at 4 a.m. That's not a detail you notice unless something about his appearance triggered a deep recognition response. The human brain doesn't process bushy eyebrows during a trauma event unless that feature is so distinctive it became the only detail her brain could hold on to while everything else was shutting down. The crime scene told a story that made experienced homicide detectives physically ill. This wasn't a frenzied attack. This was systematic. Each victim was stabbed multiple times with a large fixed-blade knife. The medical examiner determined that some victims were killed in their sleep, so quickly they never fully woke. Others woke during the attack and fought back, their defensive wounds showing they tried to protect themselves. But no one screamed loud enough to wake the roommates downstairs or alert neighbors. That requires one of 2 things. Either the killer was controlling them psychologically, convincing them to stay quiet, or he was incapacitating them so fast they couldn't generate sound. Both options are terrifying. The psychological profile of this killer started to emerge immediately. Extreme planning, high intelligence, comfort with violence, lack of empathy. But also, and this is critical, a need to prove superiority. This wasn't about the victims personally. None of them had known enemies. None were involved in anything that would provoke this level of violence. The killer chose them because they represented something to him. Young, attractive college students living normal lives. Everything he wasn't, everything he couldn't have. And he was going to prove he could destroy it without getting caught. The investigation went cold for 6 weeks. No suspects, no arrests. The public was terrified. Then, on December 30th, 2022, police arrested Bryan Kohberger, a 28-year-old Ph.D. Criminology student at Washington State University, 8 miles from the crime scene. He was studying criminal justice. His thesis topic, How Criminals Leave Psychological Traces at Crime Scenes. He taught undergraduates about forensic evidence. He knew exactly how investigations worked. And according to the evidence, he'd used that knowledge to plan a quadruple homicide. Here's what makes this case psychologically unprecedented. Kohberger had no apparent connection to the victims. He'd never met them. They didn't share classes, friends, or social circles. But his phone records showed he'd driven past their house at least 12 times in the months before the murders. 12 documented times his phone pinged the cell tower near their house between midnight and 5 a.m. He was stalking them, watching them, learning their patterns, and they never knew he existed. This is organized predatory behavior, not impulsive, not reactive, predatory. The hallmark of a specific type of killer, the injustice collector. These are individuals who perceive themselves as victims of an unjust world, who believe society has denied them what they deserve, and who meticulously plan violence against people who represent that injustice. They're not killing individuals, they're killing symbols, and that makes them incredibly dangerous because the victims are interchangeable. It's not personal, it's ideological. Kohberger's digital footprint revealed a pattern of obsessive behavior. Online posts asking criminals how they felt after committing crimes. Research into visual surveys studying how people process fear. Questions about whether criminals felt remorse or if they rationalized their actions as necessary. He wasn't just academically curious, he was building a psychological framework to understand himself, to prepare himself for what he was planning to do. The DNA on the knife sheath matched Kohberger. That's how they caught him. A single skin cell transferred from his hand to the leather snap on the sheath. But here's the forensic psychology question. Why did he bring the sheath into the house? Experienced knife users leave the sheath in the car or at home. You don't carry a sheathed knife into a crime scene. You carry the knife ready to use. But Kohberger brought the sheath inside, removed the knife, committed the murders, and left the sheath behind. That suggests one of two things. Either he was so focused on the kills that he didn't notice he'd left it, or he brought it intentionally as a psychological calling card, a way of saying, I was here and you'll never prove it. The former suggests task fixation, a psychological state where someone is so intensely focused on completing an action that peripheral awareness disappears. This is common in high-stress situations and explains why he didn't notice he'd left evidence. The latter suggests grandiosity, a belief that even leaving evidence wouldn't matter because he was too intelligent to be caught. Both are consistent with the profile of an organized killer with narcissistic traits, and that should terrify us all. Subscribe to Zorivox Chronicles, because in the next episode, I'm analyzing the complete behavioral profile of Bryan Kohberger, his childhood, his academic trajectory, his online presence, and the psychological warning signs that were visible years before these murders. We need to understand how someone goes from studying crime to committing it. Because if we don't, the next Kohberger is already in a classroom somewhere, taking notes.